Now let's discuss a board that is way better for the under the gun plus one raiser. Let's discuss Queen 10-7. So this is a spot where the player in the big blind will usually have a massive range disadvantage because remember, the big blind has their entire pre-flop range, which contains all sorts of junk. And the under the gun plus one player has mostly some queens and tens and ace highs and under pairs, right? So like pretty decent hands. So this is a spot where across the board, the player in the big blind has very, very low equity. However, some cards are still better or worse. As we see, an ace is terrible, whereas a six is not quite as bad, right? So let's take a look at the GTO strategy here. As you can see, the ace is terrible, right? So you basically never bet, whereas the six is not quite as bad, in which case you're going to be betting more frequently. As you see, you actually bet pretty frequently on a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, which is interesting, right? You wouldn't necessarily think these low cards are all that great. The thing is, though, is that you do have some hands that effectively count as premium hands that would love to bet big. Like, for example, on a 2, right? Say the turn's a 2. Notice that the player in the big blind has hands like King Queen and Queen Jack and Queen 10 that want to bet, right? So those are the hands that are being bet in this scenario. You're betting your best made hands plus some draws like Jack 8 and whatnot. All right, let's go through this scenario. Let's say the turn is a queen. All right, under the gun plus one raises, we call the big blind, Queen 10-7, check, check, turns a queen. So now, because their range is mostly marginal made hands, we're going to be betting very polarized. What is a polarized range on this board? Well, pretty much queens and better, right? Okay, so let's go through and categorize the hands. Queens and better are the nuts. Marginal made hands are going to be the 10s, the 7s, the under pairs, and the ace high. Already have all that nice and clearly categorized. Probably not all the ace highs because we would check fold some hands like ace 6 without a spade if our opponent bets, but we could very easily check call with hands like ace 6 of spades. And then we just want to go through and find as many bluffs as we can possibly find because we actually do have a decent chunk of premium hands, right? So King Jack's a draw, Jack 9's a draw, 9-8's a draw. Then we have some junkier ones like 8-6. 8-6 is a draw, but it's pretty terrible. And then we have a bunch of spades that are fine. So this is a spot where I would typically bet all my low spades and the open-ended straight draws. I guess we have like Jack 8. We could go Jack 8 here, but that's probably not so great in this scenario. So probably just check the Jack 8 offsuit gut shot. The problem is again, we're betting into an opponent whose range is actually like pretty strong, right? Because they're going to have some queens. They're going to have a lot of 10s and a lot of 7s. And they're just not going to fold all that often. So we can't be too overly aggressive with our draws. And notice we already have a lot of draws to begin with, right? We're already at 12% to premium made hand percentage of 10, which is a little too many bluffs or a few too many bluffs. The thing is, though, is that if you take a look at our premium hands that we're betting, they're all just like super nut hands, right? To the point that we're thrilled to get our money in with them. When your nut hands are like legitimately the super nuts, you can get away with having a touch more draws if necessary. Also notice that our junk range here actually does win at showdown sometimes, like ace 9, right? If we have ace 9 here and it goes check, check, turn, check, check, river, we actually do win sometimes. So that's good. That helps protect our checking range a little bit. Let's take a look at the GTO strategy. It looks like we're betting 19% of the time. I was betting 22, so slightly more. Maybe the solver doesn't have quite as many bluffs as me. It's probably checking some of these flush draws. And notice it actually does check a lot of these marginal flush draws, which is, kind of surprising to see. It looks like it's betting the best flush draws, checking the weaker ones, which, probably makes some sense because it's easy enough for under the gun plus one to have the ace high flush draw. So I guess you want to practice a little bit of caution here. But notice the queens are mostly betting, right? The vast majority of the queens are betting and no other made hands, right? And then we're just looking at various draws. So you see Jack 9 bets often, King Jack bets often, some flush draws with a jack and a king and an ace bet often. And then 4s, 3s, and 2s elect to bet. Kind of surprised these hands are electing to bet. We've seen this happen a few times where solver does pick the low pairs to go for bets sporadically. Very surprised it would not just use additional flush draws. But I guess if you bet all of your flush draws, then your checking range no longer has flush draws, right? And to be fair, like I was mixing it, right? We were checking our ace high flush draws. Seems like the logical thing to do. But it's not what solver does, so neat strategy. But you see it is still very polarized, right? Either way. Let's take a look at that 2 scenario, right? This is a spot where I think we get to bet even a little bit more often. Notice here we're betting our good queens for value because our good queens beat our opponent's weaker queens in 10s and 7s. So we're betting our good queens for value. Then, what else? What else? Let's go through and categorize the made hands. That's going to be mainly 10s, 7s. I like the ace-high flush draws again. And then I have these like bottom pair type hands that I elected to use some of them as bluffs, which may seem a little bit abnormal, but I think it's probably okay to use these as bluffs because if you check and your opponent bets, you have to fold, right? And you don't really want to check fold. Like you can reasonably check call a hand like King 2 because King 2 has additional equity with the king, whereas like 9-2 does not. So I think that's probably viable. I don't think you want to bet like pocket 3s here. Like remember on the previous example, the solver bet the underpairs. Here 3s is not really an underpair because there's 2 on the board. So I don't think you're going to want to bet with that. I have Jack 8 suited betting. Probably bets more Jack 8s if you felt inclined. But I think this strategy is nice and implementable. I do want to make it clear, like I don't know which bluffs the solver is going to choose, but I do know that we balanced out our range pretty nicely, right? We probably have a few too many bluffs. Maybe we could check some additional hands like some of these flush draws at the bottom. Maybe that's what the solver will do, or maybe check some of the bottom pairs. I'm not entirely sure. But you want to make sure that you develop a strategy that is reasonable and implementable that you can use at the table. And if you have strategies in your head, like always check nut flush draws and always bet the weaker ones, it's probably going to be okay. It's not going to be perfect. We're not trying to play perfect GTO, but it's probably going to be okay or close enough to okay. That said, if we see the solver like never bets the low flush draws, which again, I don't know what it's going to do, but if it never bets the low flush draws, then maybe that's something we should learn. That's like a little adjustment we should learn for the spot. Then in this scenario, you're betting the better flush draws, checking the weaker ones. So that's what you want to be considering in these scenarios. Anyway, we see the ranges line up pretty nicely. Notice in this spot, we actually have a lot of marginal made hands compared, or we have a lot of junk compared to our marginal made hands. This scenario too, a lot of marginal made hands compared to junk. And that's fine. We're going to be making equity by betting with our best hands in this scenario to the point that we're okay kind of leaving our checking range hanging out to dry. And also remember the checking range does win at the showdown a lot of the time when it does go check, 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 check. King 9, should we bluff King 9? Probably not. All right, because we already have too many bluffs, right? Let's see what the solver does. In this scenario, solver is betting all the queens, or at least mostly the good queens, right? Solver is betting King Jack, Jack 9, Jack 8, sometimes probably just spades. So some jacks. I think Jack, I mean, like in reality, it's probably fine to bet Jack 8. 9-8's betting sometimes. Notice again, the solver does opt to use these bottom pair type hands as bluffs instead of the flush draws because it's probably wanting to protect its range. Notice these hands that are all bluffing are all clearly 25% roughly. And these are all flush draws that are betting. So solver likes to bet the better flush draws here. Probably because it presumes a hand like ace 4 actually doesn't have much showdown value, so it doesn't make a difference, right? So, neat scenario. But as you see, solver does still bet. I was betting 30%, solver bets 30% too, so that lines up pretty nicely.